Hi, and welcome to another edition of Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry De Silva. It seems like we've done this before, but welcome to the show, and we've got a great episode for you. We're going to be talking with someone who deals with a subject that to you and I may seem rather kind of unusual or the unknown, but we have a guest, Nancy Barham, who is a past life regression therapist. And she has written a book, the book entitled The Past Life Perspective. And before we bring Ann on, we're going to show a little video to kind of give you and I a better feeling of what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. So let's roll the clip.
I'm the author of The Past Life Perspective and a licensed marriage and family therapist. I got trained by Dr. Brian Weiss and other leaders in the field and gradually evolved to mainly doing past life therapy. If you're experiencing problems like enduring weight issue or difficulty in finding a committed relationship, very possibly these experiences now are rooted in a trauma from a prior lifetime. When we view our current life as just one thread in a much larger tapestry that our soul is creating across multiple lifetimes, it gives much greater depth and meaning to the people, events, and purpose in our current life. I've had clients from all walks of life coming in with all different sorts of issues, and what I tried to do in the book is pick some of the more interesting stories, some of the more dramatic stories, and ones that could really illustrate lessons for all of us. So, for example, the grad student that came in who suddenly had a terrible case of writer's block. She just went into a panic whenever she sat down to write one of her important papers, and this hadn't been happening to her before. So what we discovered was a prior lifetime where she went through a very traumatic incident related to some writing that she had done. We were able to release that, and she was then able to move forward and finish her degree. Even chronic physical issues may be rooted in a prior lifetime, so by actually going into those experiences, uncovering them, and working through them, it actually frees us up to move forward in our current life much more easily. So there's so many wonderful stories in the book of people really digging in and releasing a lot of blocks that have held them back, and then also plugging into this wonderful sense of their spiritual nature, their ongoing existence across many lifetimes. So it's a very inspiring book in many ways. It's also very practical in that there's a number of exercises that you can do at the end of chapters to just help you expand your own perspective and help you plug in a little more into that greater awareness.
Well, there you go. Now you've got a better footing as we bring our guest joining us from California, Nancy Barham. Ann, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Larry. Just really happy to be here today.
Now, let me try this again. You're a certified regression therapist with training in transpersonal psychology, hypnosis, therapeutic imagery, and trauma release modularities. Am I saying that right or no?
Well, modalities would be the last word, but that's pretty good.
All right.
That's pretty good. It's quite
Yes.
a mouthful, but essentially it's just saying I'm a professional trained psychotherapist, and in addition, I happen to have this specialty doing past life regression work, which is a little unusual for a conventional therapist to be doing.
There you go. There you go. You've got all the bases covered for sure.
Right.
Before we continue, again, the website for more information about Ann and her book, www.pastlives.org, published by Simon & Schuster, simonschuster.com for more information. How did you get the idea for the book? And equally as important, what was your purpose for writing the book? Because I got the impression that being a first-time author, you were maybe surprised that you had such a smooth ride in getting the book published. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I did have a pretty smooth ride, which tells me it was meant to happen. The inspiration for writing the book really was the fact that I've been doing this kind of work for over 20 years, and I keep very thorough records on all my clients and the issues that we were working on and the stories that came up and the spiritual messages that came through. And so I had files and files of all these amazing lessons and experiences. And it just seemed like what a shame if those just never got out to the world at large. They're so interesting. There's information and lessons for all of us in each of these stories. So I decided, I think I'd better write a book, and went ahead and did that. With the idea that, number one, it's very entertaining. So this is the kind of book you can sit down and read one of the chapters in 10, 15 minutes and be entertained as well as inspired, and perhaps find ways to look at your own life in somewhat different ways. So it was also the feeling that it was time for someone to bring this whole field of past life regression work a little more down to earth and make it more available to people, because it really is a tremendous way to very quickly resolve sometimes would have been really enduring issues in people's lives, and a way of doing it that's pretty painless and very quick and really shifts things at a deep fundamental level so that people are much more free to move forward in their current life.
Now, through your life, what drew you to the study and eventual practice of past life regression therapy? Obviously, your education was kind of in a different field, but was there anything in your life as a youngster, a teenager, young adult that kind of steered you, do you think, in this direction? As far as, did you have your own experiences?
I wish I could say I had some great awakening. Some people do, where they'll have a spontaneous remembrance of a past life that's just really profound for them. But for me, it was more, I was raised Roman Catholic, and it just never worked for me. So when I was an adolescent, I started doing a lot of reading about other spiritual traditions, particularly Eastern traditions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and all that, and came across the concept of reincarnation, which to me just was this feeling of, but of course. It just really resonated and made a lot of sense to me. And that began many years of spiritual exploration for myself in terms of determining what I believed, what I understood as the organizing principles to our lives and the cosmos. Didn't really think it would be something that I would do professionally until I had been a licensed therapist for a certain number of years, and then found myself kind of going, there's something more that I'm meant to be doing, something in addition to the conventional counseling. And that's when the light kind of went on of, I could be doing past life regression work. At the time, my daughter was only 2, and I didn't really want to leave her. And what happened very shortly after that recognition was the 2 most world-renowned experts in the area at the time, who were Dr. Brian Weiss and Dr. Roger Woolger, who's now deceased. They both came to a retreat center within a half an hour of my house, and each did week-long professional trainings. So I couldn't have gotten a better foundation for starting to move into this work, and it came to me instead of my having to search it out. So again, it was another one of those meant to be kind of situations.
Now, do you think because you had studied to be a licensed marriage and family therapist in the beginning, do you think that having those skills helped you transition maybe easier than some other people might into this kind of other field as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, Larry, because essentially the work that I'm doing involves a lot of the same counseling skills, because as you dig into someone's prior lifetime, and I want to point out that these are all memories coming from the client. It's not like going to a psychic and the psychic telling you, oh, you were a Roman soldier in a prior lifetime and you were stabbed in the belly and that's why you have irritable bowel syndrome. That kind of the way you might get it from a psychic, but this is more, it's actually coming from the client. They're deeply relaxed and their own memories are bubbling up and surfacing. And I'm kind of the tour guide asking questions and sending them in directions to really learn what happened and where energy perhaps is stuck or things are unresolved. So while doing that, you need a lot of the same skills that you need in regular therapy, because you're needing your empathy, you're needing your intuitive sense of where we need to go. You need to know how to deal with traumatic events and to be supportive of people as things are being unearthed. So I always highly recommend that if anyone's interested in doing some of this work for themselves, that they find someone who is a trained therapist who has then also done additional training in doing past life work, just so in case something really unusual comes up, you're in the right kind of container to handle that.
Like they say about cats, I guess, as I read the book, humans do have multiple lives. Would you say that that applies to all humans? Or, I mean, I'm having enough trouble with the life I have now. I mean, so, I don't know. I give you, for instance, let's say that the world as we know it right now consisted of 10 people, to keep the example simple. Does that mean that in many people's eyes that each one of those 10 people lived, another 5 or 10 lives before? I mean, in other words, is there anyone that is coming into the world, whether it's this year, next year, the year after, that have no, no prior existence?
Pretty rare. Usually, those of us in this line of work understand that people have had hundreds of prior lifetimes, usually. And so even those people who are described as an old soul versus a young soul, it's really more just talking about your current personality as you're showing up in this lifetime, that if you're considered a old soul, it could be that you just come across as much more spiritual and much more deep at a young age than people might normally expect. And if they say, oh, he's a young soul, it's kind of like this current personality maybe is having a little harder time dealing with experience of human life. But in reality, we're all old souls. We've been around a long time. Some of us like to come in and do human life more frequently than others. But all of us have had many, many experiences on the planet.
There you go. Now, many of the examples that you talk about from the to the readers in the book are about actual case clients that you've dealt with, and they allowed you to share their experiences through a past life regression. Am I correct?
This is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, describe for myself and as well as the viewer a typical past life therapy session. In other words, there is some light hypnosis involved.
Yeah, and really for those people who have never experienced hypnosis, it's really just a state of deep relaxation, very similar to being in meditation or something like that. We're in a continuum of consciousness, and so right now you and I talking, we're at one end of that continuation of consciousness. On the other end is deep sleep. Somewhere in the middle we have meditation and hypnosis and trance states. So what I do is just an overall general relaxation. The client and I have talked in advance about what it is that they're interested in looking into. So for instance, I had a client once who had a work situation where the chiropractor that she worked for actually had a drug problem and was kind of running his business into the ground, but she felt very, very loyal to him and knew she should go find a new job, but just found herself staying and wanting to help him and all of that. And she wanted to see if there was a past life connection here that could help her break that misguided sense of loyalty. So I take her to a very relaxed state and then suggest that she go to whatever prior life held the origin of this relationship dynamic between the two of them. And then She ended up going to a lifetime in Spain in the 1800s, where she was the mother, he was her son. He had serious problems with depression, and he ended up hanging himself from the rafters of their barn. And she, as his mother, found him and had horrible feelings of guilt that she didn't know that he was so troubled, that she couldn't prevent this. And so you can see how that might, bringing that dynamic forward, account for this sense of loyalty she still had and that desire to save him from himself. So I guide the client through to key events of the lifetime. We look for people that play important roles and see if we can recognize them from their current life. We go to places where perhaps emotion got stuck and unexpressed, go through their death, and then go to that place after death where we're kind of hanging out in a spiritual space, disembodied. And we actually are able to access guidance from some higher levels of wisdom for the client as well. So it's a pretty complete picture. And we do some work then to release whatever trauma or unexpressed emotions or energy that got blocked, so that then the client is able to move forward very much more easily in their current life.
Now, you mentioned some clients, after having a session or perhaps more than one session, actually lose their fear of death. Explain that. Give me an example of that.
Similar to someone who's gone through a near-death experience in this life, where they've actually died, maybe their heart has stopped, either in a surgery or some tremendous accident, and they go to this spiritual space and they feel surrounded by love and peace, and they perhaps get some important messages and things like that. And then when they come back, they're a changed person and they really have no fear of death. Usually these people that have gone through a near-death experience. We're doing what I call NDE, which is near-death experience. So we do NDE light, in that we're having this virtual death experience by going through it from the prior lifetime. So clients, when they are in the past life regression and have gone through the death in the prior lifetime, they have a similar experience of being in a place where they're surrounded by love and warmth and light and joy and peace. And they often also get some profound spiritual realizations or guidance or input. And they really do, after having gone through that, realize in their current life, it's like, there's really nothing to fear about death. In fact, I'm going to be going to this most amazing, wonderful space. It's all gravy there. So it even helps deal with some of the challenges in the current life, knowing that this is just temporary. I will get past this. And on my death, I'm going to this wonderful, amazing space that makes all troubles disappear.
The book is called The Past Life Perspective. Our guest, Ann C. Barham. Website, www.pastlives.org. Published by Simon & Schuster, simonandschuster.com. Would you share an example of how comforting a past life issue can open the door to forgiveness and perhaps emotional healing in a person's present life?
Okay, sure. So I had I have many clients that come in wanting to look at issues around relationships. So it's either between spouses, there's a lot of conflict and problem, or maybe it's with the parent or even with the child. So one good example was a young lady who came in and she said that she always was somewhat in conflict with her husband, almost to the point of feeling like she was fighting for her life with him, which is not a good place to be with your spouse. And so we went to some prior lifetimes, a kind of a chain of lifetimes, in fact, where each of them indeed caused each other's death. So one was in ancient Rome, where The husband now was a judge, and she was a soldier who had been accused of causing someone else's death, and the judge actually convicted her and sentenced her to death. So that was one space where he was causing her death, and there were other lifetimes where she was responsible for his death. So they traded this back and forth for a while. And what we were able to do is realize that despite that dynamic, that there was a lot of love between them because they kept choosing to come back together, trying to work this out. And so this was the opportunity now that they were actually married in a love relationship, where they could put down that sense of having to be guarded and competing. And it really eased their relationship considerably. She said it turned things around for her as far as that fear of anytime we have a fight, it could get dangerous, So yeah, it can really resolve things like that pretty easily.
Now, tell me about, in the book you talk about and share your first experience with past life regression while attending Santa Clara University in California.
Right. So I was in my graduate program for counseling psychology, and one of the courses I took was called therapeutic imagery. And toward the end of the semester, the instructor said he wanted to demonstrate the fact that occasionally what a client came up with might sound like it came from a prior lifetime. And so he wanted to make sure that we knew how to handle that. Now, I found out later that actually he was a big-time regressionist, and this was kind of his thing, but Santa Clara University being a Jesuit college, he didn't really come out of that closet too profoundly there. But anyway, he wanted to show us how to deal with this, asked for volunteers. And so I'd had a problem with the little toes on my feet were what were called rotated hammer toes. So they kind of laid on their side and kind of pointed out a little bit. And I was very active with tennis and horseback riding, and it was actually causing me quite a bit of problem with pain. So I actually had surgery on those toes to rotate them back and all this. And I still was having problems. So I said, hey, I've got this problem with my feet. And so he selected me to do this regression and had me lie down on this filthy carpet in front of the room and proceeded to regress me. And I went to a lifetime as a young Asian woman, actually a girl, and my family was binding my feet. And I was very, very rebellious about this, did not want it to be done, and actually made a plan with one of the servants to escape, was caught, and since I came from quite a prominent family, this brought a huge dishonor upon my father and my house and all this, and I was sold into slavery. And I eventually ended up committing suicide for the shame of it all.
I don't know, Anne, this sounds like you had a bad Chinese lunch. Is that what?
Maybe.
But
the fascinating part of this was the whole time that I'm going through this and these images are coming into my mind and this information is just popping in, my legs were shaking uncontrollably, just lying there, and they're just, and I couldn't control them at all. And it was all this energy that was just somehow getting released out of my system. And after that session, no more problem with my toes at all. So I would have people stop me in the hall at school and say, Anne, how are your feet? It was even people I didn't even know or weren't in that class. So apparently people have been talking about it. And I was like, they're great, thanks. It's no problem. So it was a very dramatic demonstration of even sometimes how some physical symptoms can be addressed with using this therapy.
Some info to share. Public image sometimes doesn't accurately reflect what people believe in private. A Gallup poll taken in 2001 showed that 25% of adult Americans admitted anonymously that they believed in reincarnation. An online Harris poll in November 2013 similarly put the overall number at believers at 24%, an increase from 20% in 2009. So obviously there is still in the minority, but there is still, and I think you mentioned in the book that a lot of folks in religions, in the Catholic religion for one, tend to believe that this is the case in much higher numbers than perhaps some other religions.
Yeah, higher than we would expect, actually. Of course, if you are looking at the world in its entirety, there's actually about 50% of the world population believes in reincarnation. So it's just more in the Western world that we're a little more skeptical about it. But I've worked with people from very surprising walks of life, including Presbyterian minister, someone who is a devout Mormon. It's like many religious traditions, people also consider this at least a possibility. So I have a number of people that come and say, I'm not sure, but I want to find out. So you don't need a complete belief in order for this to actually be very successful as a technique. And one of the things that I say about it, since I'm coming from a therapeutic viewpoint, is my concern is not so much to prove whether this really was a prior lifetime that you lived, but more, what is the therapeutic value? What kinds of change does this engender? How helpful is this? And that seems to be, even if it's just a rich metaphor for whatever's going on in your life, it seems to be incredibly effective at releasing things that have been hanging on for a long time. And I've had many people come to me who either with a physical problem, and the physicians are like, there's no reason for you to have this pain, or there's no reason that you should be having these symptoms, but they still have them. We have a session and the symptoms are relieved.
Ann C. Barham joining us for the hour here on Studio 411. The book, The Past Life Perspective, www.pastlives.org, published by Simon & Schuster, simonandschuster.org for more .com, I beg your pardon, for more information. Another statistic, it's in the high 80s, we'll say rounded up, 90% of your clients have retrieved past life memories on their first try. Now, talk a little bit about that, but also it just seems to me that the people that approach you, there must be something in their makeup or something within them that is saying, I need to go see this person or anyone
Right.
else. Obviously, you're on the West Coast. It could be somebody in Ohio or in Connecticut, wherever. But again, what's the correlation there? I mean, is it just that the 10% that don't seem to, like, I would probably be one of the 10%. I don't even know if I do the hypnosis thing. I find it fascinating. But
Yeah.
it seems that they have some inkling that there's something they want to uncover.
Right. So let me point out that using the 90%, that doesn't mean 90% of the total population would necessarily retrieve past life memories, because, of course, my clientele is self-selecting. So if you're convinced that there's no way that this has any value and that it would not work, of course, it's not going to be successful. So the people that come see me, the grand majority of them believe that this is at least possible, because otherwise why would they be paying me to do this experience, right? So so in that sense, they're self-selecting. The amazing thing is the number of people that come to me and just say, I really don't know, I'm kind of hoping maybe I'll get something, but I don't know what I believe, and they still will have a really amazing experience with it. The very small percentage that don't go to a prior lifetime, this happens for a couple reasons. And most of those people, what ends up is that they have something from their current life, like their early childhood, that's really the source of their problem or issue that they're looking into, or is so compelling that it has to be seen. So for instance, I had a woman come in the other day. She's in her late 50s. We go to a memory of having been molested when she was about 5 years old. this was something that she hadn't even remembered. She had blanked it out. But the memory came through, and it was really important for her to see this because it explained a lot of the symptoms that she'd been having and the experiences that she'd had in her life. So we have that category where there really is something about your current life that needs to be dealt with. And that, again, is why it's so helpful that I have conventional therapeutic training, because I can work with that if that's what comes up. Then there's another very, very small percentage that people that can't relax adequately to be able to do the work. That's very, very rare, but does happen occasionally. So for the most part, these memories are actually relatively close to the surface for people. And it's just that we're not recognizing that that's what's going on. So for instance, might be you travel somewhere that you've never been before, maybe a foreign country, and you feel completely at home there. You know how to find your way around, even though you haven't studied maps. You just really kind of fit in the groove right away. Well, typically that's because you were there in a prior lifetime and you did know your way around, and you're just kind of getting reconnected with that. Or when that deja vu experience where you meet someone for the first time and you have this feeling like you've known them forever. Well, very possibly you have known them for a really long time and you've had a significant relationship in a prior lifetime. But so these things do come up. Dreams that we have that are very persistent or very vibrant often are actually past life material that's kind of bubbling to the surface in our dreams. So there's a lot of clues in our day-to-day life. It's just we don't always stop to recognize them and label them. So one of the things I did with the book also is at the end of each of the chapters, there's a little section where the reader can do a little exploration on their own, be it sitting down and thinking about what recurrent dreams have I had, what dreams have I had where I felt like, gee, I really recognize this place, and playing with that a little bit to see if you can develop a little more some of your own recognition of possible prior lifetimes.
And those things that Anne's talking about at the end of most of the chapters, essential truths uncovered and also expanding your perspective. I believe that one is pretty much at the end of most of the chapters. Some of the chapters, I think there were 4 of them that deal with 4 key reasons many of your clients seek past life therapy.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to cover. So one of them is physical issues, as I mentioned before, that they've just had problems that the conventional Western medicine says there's no reason that they should have that. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. Another one is relationship issues. As I mentioned, that's probably the biggest reason people come in, because they want to understand a dynamic that they can't break, or they want to know just how was I connected to my spouse who I love so dearly? How were we connected in the past? There are emotional dynamics such as feelings of guilt or depression or anxiety, just these enduring emotional states that people want to see if they can release. And then there's those people that it's more just for spiritual exploration. They want to boost their own sense of their spirituality or explore. And so those are kind of the key areas, which ends up covering a very broad range. But the story I wanted to share about the physical symptom is a really fun one. I had a gal back east, and I do quite a few sessions over Skype, because it turns out as long as I can see your face and hear what you're saying, we can do a very successful session. So that's really lovely, because I've worked with people as far away as Australia, Europe, that kind of thing, which is really fun. Anyway, so this woman on the East Coast, she had a very bad problem in her neck after having had a car accident with a lot of pain. And the doctors had done, see if I can remember what the procedure is, some sort of ablation of the nerve, which actually killed the nerve, which was supposed to get rid of the pain. And they did that twice because the first time didn't work. And the second time, she still had pain. So, and the doctors just threw up their hands and said, there's absolutely no reason that you should be having this pain. There are no living nerves in there anymore. So she contacted me and wanted to see if maybe there was something carried over from a past life. So she went to a lifetime, I think it was in the 1940s, in Hollywood, where her prior personality was married to a minor actor, and he was very good looking and quite a playboy, and had had a series of affairs. And she was driving their car one night on one of those windy roads in Hollywood, and he admitted once again to another affair, and she was so upset that she ran into a tree and ended up being paralyzed from the neck down, and was hospitalized for a while and eventually died from her injuries. So the fascinating thing with this was the client called me back about an hour after the session, and she said, you won't believe this, but I had my husband, she right away reported that the pain in her neck was quite a bit diminished. So then about an hour later, she said, I had my husband look at the back of my neck, and it's been swollen by about 1.5 inches for months. And he looked at it and said, it's down at least 1 inch from where it was. So somehow her body had been hanging on to this trauma, which was also related to the whole emotional dynamic of feeling betrayed and not being able to trust and all the disloyalty and all of that. And by just seeing that and working through that, the body just, boom, let go of a lot of what it was hanging on to. So interesting stories like that. They're kind of almost hard to believe, but I've been through so many of them with people.
So with some things, if I'm understanding correctly, when, not with everybody, but when it comes to, medical or physical issues, obviously there's what, modern medicine can do. Then there's some that believe there's things like what acupuncture and other remedies that are maybe perhaps not Western medicine approved throughout the decades. And then there's the kind of the medicine or therapy of the mind, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah, the mind, and also just kind of the energy systems of the body that seem to hang on to things. Yeah.
Now, do clients' past life regression therapy ever showcase other concerns than the ones that they perhaps came to you about? I mean, to kind of unearth other problems? I mean, or maybe good things too, but I mean, other things that maybe they weren't even aware of?
Well, not so much that they weren't aware of, but that they don't necessarily ask about or tell me about. So I'll have about a half-hour interview prior to going into the session where we'll talk about the client's concerns or what they want to investigate. And sometimes people aren't all that forthcoming. So they'll mention one thing, and when we go into the session, a whole lot of other material comes up, and they'll say, then they'll admit afterwards, well, yeah, actually, I have this problem with drugs, or I have this, or this is going on. So often things that they haven't told me will come up. And occasionally we'll actually go to a lifetime that focuses on something altogether different from what they asked about. And that, in those cases, I always believe that there's just a really compelling reason for them to see that. And these clients always say, wow, I didn't even think to ask about that, but that was so important for me to see. I am so glad that's what came up. So I tend to just really trust that some higher guidance somehow is having the client go exactly where they need to go.
I'm getting the impression that, especially with the rate of success and the just the overall numbers, I think that we all should look into this, because I think that really a lot of us, without even knowing, should probably seek this. I mean, this is almost like, like on a to-do list. Well, I need to go have, instead of having my palm read, then, go and do something like this. I mean, because the mind is holds a lot of stuff, especially as you said,
Yes.
things that occur, things that, and you're taking it a step further, which is situations where obviously, you know, other lifetimes. I mean, you mentioned in the book, I mean, people, you know, being at historical places. You talk about, you get a kick out of when people claim that, or you know, give you a visual of them actually being with a famous person. You know,
Yes, it doesn't happen too often, and you have to look at the fact that of the billions of people and personalities that have been on the planet across these many, many centuries, that those people who are actually famous enough for us to still know their names is such a small percentage. So, of course, when we regress people, the likelihood is you're going to be a peasant or you're going to be someone who does not have a well-known life. But on occasion, I do get people who do go to a lifetime that's recognizable, or they brush shoulders with someone who's quite famous. I had one gal go back to a lifetime where she was in Benjamin Franklin's think tank, in a sense, which was really very fun. I had someone go back to the Renaissance once, and he was a member of the Medici family, which is very well known for being a big part of the Italian Renaissance. Someone who was the doctor, I think, of the Tsarist family in Russia before they were assassinated. So you do occasionally get these historical figures, but the majority of the lifetimes that we go to are pretty much common everyday folk.
Well, I know Benjamin Franklin, from my reading, was quite a rascal with the ladies. So I'm sure this client would have some great stories to tell about Ben Franklin. Oh my goodness! I hesitated when we first talked about having you on the show, and then I said, well, she mentions it in the book as well. Someone who was, in my view, growing up, was almost like the queen of reincarnation and probably past life therapy. We have a photo of her, Oscar-winning actress Shirley MacLaine, and she has basically believed in reincarnation for decades. I mean, she's in her 80s. I have to tell a little story recently. I think it was several years ago. She was at an Oscar ceremony, and she was introduced by a well-known actress. And then Shirley stated, quote, "That's the nicest reception I've had in 250,000 years." So, you know, people like, especially in the 80s when Shirley started writing, you know, some of her memoir books. The first one in particular, but she's written some follow-up one. The joke is that MacLaine believes her soul was inhabited or has inhabited the earth for about as long as one can count. And she's always been known for being one of Hollywood's biggest proponents of the concept of reincarnation. The idea is that our souls inhabit bodies over time. And she even talks, I'm just paraphrasing, she talks about how did I know and recognize streets and temples when she first went to India? Why did she find herself speaking Portuguese when she was in Brazil? Each human can point to any number of similar experiences, specific moments that make them wonder why and how they know what they know. So again, tying in with a lot of what you've already mentioned earlier. So you know, I think people sometimes make light of Shirley, but she really, you know, was ahead of the curve, you might say.
She was, and she, you know, Shirley's flamboyant and quite a character. So of course, her way of talking about this is going to be a little out there anyway, but she's wonderful. I met her a few years ago with the book, and it was a kick. One thing I wanted to point out that you mentioned a little earlier is the idea that also we can actually tap into talents and abilities and skills that we developed in prior lifetimes and to kind of bring them forward to actually help us in our current life. So a lot of times with clients, I'll suggest to them that they really think of the prior personality that they connected with as their own personal mentor, if that individual is quite accomplished in an area that they're trying to develop now. So that can be really, really helpful. I have a number of creative types that might come in, say writers or artists or something, that are struggling a little bit, and we can go back to a prior lifetime where they were very successful using those skills, and that prior personality actually can give them advice about what they need to do to get past their writer's block, or how to really own their talents and skills more now and put those to good use. So it isn't always that we're digging into this really intense traumatic stuff, that we also can be bringing forward a lot of really wonderful positive stuff as well. So our prior lifetimes affect us in so many ways that we're not normally aware of, that it's just a very rich way to learn more about yourself and human existence and what we're all doing here on the planet.
Nancy Barham joining us for the remaining moments here on Studio 411, the book, The Past Life Perspective. For more information, www.pastlives.org. And again, the book published by Simon & Schuster, simonandschuster.com. You mentioned in the book that some clients travel an unusually long distance for sessions with you. Now, you talked about where they did Skype, but obviously some folks felt the need to travel because maybe they felt they needed to be in your presence in order to have maybe more of a success with what they were looking to achieve.
Yeah, it's really an individual choice on that. And some of the travel involved was before I started doing Skype, because it took me a while to decide that Skype could really be okay. But some people much prefer doing the face-to-face, and so they will choose to travel. Some people actually prefer being at home and not having to travel. So the fact that either way works great is really wonderful, because then it just means whatever works best for the client is the way that we go.
Now, do clients ever have past life experiences where they are another gender? In other words, for those out there, a female who has a past life experience where she's a male, or a male who's a female. Again, talk us through that.
Yeah, that's very common. So we tend to go back and forth, depending on what kind of experience on a soul level we choose to have. So some people will tend to favor one gender over the other, but we've all done both. So it really provides a balance. And that's true not only of gender, but it's true of religion and culture and areas of the world. And so we all tend to move around and try a lot of different things if you're looking across the centuries. And what I like to describe past life work as, in a sense, is the great equalizer, because we will find out, if we search enough of our own lifetimes, that we've probably been on both sides of just about every issue that exists, or that, we've been male and female, we've been rich person and pauper in the street, we've been a pacifist and a real violent person. We've done it all, because on a certain level we're seeking that balance and that breadth of experience, and that we end up equaling it out one way or another by playing the different sides of these various dynamics. And that's also true within families, because a lot of times we will travel with a lot of the same people. So we might be husband and wife in one lifetime, we could be father and son in the next, we could be good friends in another lifetime. So we like to play with all the different dynamics as we're traveling across the ages.
Now, you mentioned in the book the term soul group. Explain to me what that means and how that applies.
Sure. So the general idea is that there's a certain number of beings that we really like hanging out with or working with when we're on the planet. So we will re-encounter them over and over. Not every single lifetime, but that we will tend to want to come back and have an opportunity to, again, have a significant relationship with someone within our soul group. So that was, like I was referring to, you may be spouses, and you may be parent and child, and maybe your business partners in another lifetime, and you might be enemies in another lifetime. But at times, these are even the people that we find the most challenging in our current life, because perhaps we've kind of signed up to be that irritant that's going to cause the other person to really grow and expand. So it's just people that play really significant roles in our current life are usually someone that we've been with before and will probably be with again down the road.
Now, in the remaining moment we have, what would you like most skeptics to gain from reading the past life perspective, as well as what would you like true believers to take away from the book?
So for the skeptics, I would say I'd like them to gain just an opening up of the possibility, just allowing a little bit more of an open mind and realizing that I'm not in the business to convince people of what they should believe or not believe, but just to look at the amazing possibilities that open up when we actually consider the possibility and change our perspective to this longer term. As far as the true believers, to help them see the many different ways that actually doing the past life work can improve their lives and help them move forward, and also just so that they can just really enjoy some of the many stories that are in the book from actual clients and the great spiritual insights that come through from many of the sessions.
Author and regression therapist Ann C. Barham. The book, The Past Life Perspective. Again, for more information about Ann and her work, www.pastlives.org. And the book published by Simon & Schuster. More information found at simonandschuster.com. And a pleasure. We hope to have you back on again. I know you're working on other projects, so we look forward to having you back on the show again.
Thank you, Larry. It'd be a pleasure.
Very good. You hang in there with us. And we thank you for joining us here on this episode of Studio 411. Larry DeSilva is my name. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care.